The reluctant repairman. Ethan Reeves wiped the sweat from his brow, leaving a streak of engine grease across his forehead. He squinted at the outdated control panel of the decrepit freighter he'd been trying to coax back to life for the better part of a week. The ship was a lost cause, but in this remote corner of the galaxy, even lost causes were worth their weight in credits. Ethan was the sole mechanic at way station Zeta 9, a refueling stop at the edge of civilized space. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it kept him fed and paid for his tiny room above the station's only bar. He'd taken the position years ago, telling himself it would only be temporary, a way to lay low and save up some credits before moving on to bigger and better things. But somehow, the years had slipped by, and Ethan found himself still tinkering with the same old ships, watching the same old faces come and go. He was just about to call it a day when a piercing alarm echoed through the hangar. Ethan froze, the hair on the back of his neck standing up. He knew that sound all too well. It was the station's proximity alert, warning of an incoming ship with critical system failures. Ethan raced to the control room, his heart pounding in his chest. He'd dealt with his fair share of emergencies over the years, but they never got any easier. As he burst into the room, he was met by the worried faces of the station's skeleton crew. "What have we got?" Ethan asked, sliding into the seat before the main console. "Unidentified vessel, about 5,000 clicks out," the station's sole comm officer replied, her voice tight with tension. "They're broadcasting a distress signal, but it's not on any standard frequency. I've never seen anything like it." Ethan frowned, his fingers flying over the controls as he tried to hail the ship. "This is way station Zeta 9, he said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "We're reading your distress signal. What is the nature of your emergency?" For a moment, there was nothing but static. Then, a voice crackled through the speakers, speaking in a language Ethan had never heard before. It was melodic and haunting, like a song half remembered from a dream. The universal translator struggled to keep up, its synthesized voice lagging behind the alien words. "Critical damage. Life support failing. Request immediate assistance." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. Whoever they were, these aliens were in serious trouble. "We read you," he replied, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "What kind of assistance do you require?" There was another burst of static. Then the alien voice spoke again, this time with an edge of desperation. "Require repairs. Will compensate. Please." Ethan hesitated, his mind racing. Taking on a job like this was risky, especially without knowing anything about the aliens or their technology. But the promise of compensation was tempting. Way Station Zeta 9 was always teetering on the brink of financial ruin, and a big payout could keep them afloat for months. "We'll do what we can," he said at last, making a decision he already half regretted, sending docking coordinates now. "Prepare to be boarded." As the alien ship limped towards the station, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing on the precipice of something much bigger than a simple repair job. Little did he know, he was about to be plunged into an adventure that would change not only his own life, but the fate of the entire galaxy. Alien encounter. Ethan stood before the airlock, his heart racing as he watched the alien ship dock. It was unlike anything he'd ever seen before, a sleek, silver craft that seemed to shimmer and pulse with an inner light. The ship was easily 3 times the size of the largest freighter that had ever docked at way station Zeta 9, and it dwarfed the tiny station like a shark circling a minnow. As the docking clamps engaged with a deep, resonant thud, Ethan took a steadying breath. He checked his tool belt for the 3rd time, making sure he had everything he might need. He had no idea what he was walking into, but he knew he had to be prepared for anything. The airlock hissed open, revealing a shimmering portal of light. Ethan squinted against the brightness, his hand instinctively reaching for the plasma cutter at his belt. He'd half expected to be greeted by a contingent of armed guards, or perhaps a delegation of dignitaries. Instead, he found himself face to face with a single alien figure. The alien was tall and slender, with skin that shimmered like polished silver. Its eyes were large and almond-shaped, with irises that swirled with iridescent colors. It wore a form-fitting suit of some gossamer-like material that seemed to flow and shift with its movements. "Greetings," the alien said, its voice soft and melodic. "I am Zara, commander of the Ziluthian vessel Quantum Whisper. We are grateful for your assistance." Ethan blinked, momentarily lost for words. He'd encountered plenty of alien species in his time at Waystation Zeta 9, but none quite like this. "I'm Ethan Rees," he managed at last, his voice sounding thin and reedy to his own ears. "Chief Mechanic, I understand you're having some problems with your ship." Zara inclined her head, a gesture that seemed to convey both acknowledgement and apology. "Indeed, we suffered extensive damage during our journey through the Elixion asteroid belt. Our self-repair systems are struggling to cope." Ethan frowned. The Elixion belt was notorious for its treacherous, fast-moving asteroids. Most ships gave it a wide berth. "What brings you out this way?" he asked, curiosity getting the better of him. "There's not much out here except rocks and radiation." For a moment, Zara seemed to hesitate. Her eyes flickered to the side, as if checking for eavesdroppers. "We are on a mission of great importance," she said at last, her voice low and urgent. "We carry a vital cargo, medical supplies that could turn the tide of a devastating plague on our homeworld." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. He'd heard rumors of a deadly disease sweeping through the outer colonies, but he'd never given them much credence. Out here, news traveled slowly, and facts often got mixed up with fiction. "I see," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Well, let's take a look at the damage. I'll do my best to get you back on your way as quickly as possible." Zara led him into the ship, the airlock ceiling shut behind them with a soft hiss. As they walked, Ethan couldn't help but marvel at the alien architecture surrounding him. The walls seemed to pulse with a soft inner glow, and the air was filled with a faint musical hum. When they reached the engine room, however, Ethan's sense of wonder quickly turned to dismay. The damage was extensive, far worse than he'd anticipated. Twisted metal and scorched circuitry sprawled before him like a technological battlefield. "This is going to take some time," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Your systems are unlike anything I've worked on before. I'm going to need you to walk me through your technology." Zara nodded, her expression grave. "Of course, but please hurry. Every moment we delay, more lives are lost." As Ethan set to work, his mind raced with questions. Who were these Ziluthians, and what was this plague they spoke of? What kind of medical supplies could be so vital as to risk such a perilous journey? And why, despite the urgency of their mission, did Ethan get the distinct feeling that Zara wasn't telling him the whole truth? Unraveling mysteries. Hours turned into days as Ethan worked tirelessly on the Ziluthian ship. The technology was unlike anything he'd ever encountered, a dizzying array of quantum circuits and bioorganic interfaces. Every time he thought he figured something out, he'd discover a new layer of complexity that sent him back to square one. But Ethan was nothing if not persistent. He'd always had a knack for machines, an intuitive understanding of how things fit together. And as he delved deeper into the alien systems, he began to see patterns emerge, like constellations taking shape in a night sky. Zara was a constant presence, hovering nearby to answer his questions and provide guidance. But as the days wore on, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that she was holding something back. There were times when he'd catch her staring off into space, a look of profound sadness on her face. Other times, he'd overhear her having hushed conversations with her crew, their voices low and urgent. It wasn't until the fourth day that Ethan's suspicions were finally confirmed. He was deep in the bowels of the ship, wrestling with a particularly stubborn plasma conduit, when he noticed something odd. The conduit wasn't just damaged, it looked like it had been deliberately severed, the edges too clean and precise to be the result of an asteroid impact. Ethan sat back on his heels, his mind racing. He thought back to the other damage he'd seen, the way certain systems seemed to have been targeted with surgical precision. It was almost as if, "You're being pursued, aren't you?" he said softly, not turning around. He could sense Zara's presence behind him, could feel the weight of her gaze on the back of his neck. For a long moment, there was silence. Then, a soft sigh. "Yes," Zara said, her voice heavy with resignation. "We had hoped to reach our destination before they caught up to us, but the damage to our ship has slowed us down." Ethan stood up, turning to face her. "Who's pursuing you, and why?" Zara hesitated, her eyes searching his face. "They are called the Crovox," she said at last, the name hanging in the air like a curse. "They are a warrior race, bent on conquest and domination. They seek the same thing we do, the cure to the plague that threatens to wipe out half the galaxy." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. "The medical supplies," he said, realization dawning. "They're not just medicine, are they?" Zara shook her head. "No, they are the key to synthesizing a cure. The last remaining samples of a rare plant that holds the secret to ending this pandemic. If the Crovox get their hands on it." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Ethan could imagine all too well what a race of warriors might do with such knowledge. They could hold the galaxy hostage, using the cure as a bargaining chip to expand their empire. "We have to get you out of here," Ethan said, his mind already racing with possibilities. "But your ship is in no condition to outrun a Crovox vessel. We need to find a way to even the odds." Zara's eyes widened. "What do you propose?" Ethan grinned, a plan already forming in his mind. "I propose we get creative. Your technology may be advanced, but sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective. We're going to turn this ship into a weapon they won't see coming." As he explained his idea, Ethan could see the hope kindling in Zara's eyes. It was a desperate plan, a long shot in every sense of the word, but it was the only chance they had. And if there was one thing Ethan Reeves knew how to do, it was make the impossible possible. Improvised solutions. Ethan's plan was as audacious as it was unconventional. He proposed retrofitting the Zolothian ship with a makeshift EMP cannon, using spare parts from the station's own systems. The idea was to create a weapon that could disable the Crovox ship's systems long enough for the Zolothians to escape. It was a risk, of course. Cannibalizing the station's systems would leave way station Zeta 9 vulnerable, and there was no guarantee the EMP would work against the Crovox advanced technology. But Ethan was convinced it was their best shot. Convincing the station's commander, however, was another matter entirely. "You want to do what?" Commander Alara Vex asked incredulously, her holographic form flickering above Ethan's workbench. Ethan took a deep breath, bracing himself for the argument he knew was coming. "I want to use parts from our backup power generator to build an EMP cannon for the Zolothian ship." Alara's eyes narrowed. "And leave the station without a failsafe? Are you out of your mind, Reeves?" Ethan met her gaze steadily. "Commander, these people are carrying the cure to a galaxy-wide pandemic. If the Crovox get their hands on it, millions could die." Alara's expression softened slightly. "I understand the stakes, Ethan, but my responsibility is to this station and its crew. I can't risk our safety for a mission that doesn't concern us." Ethan leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. "But it does concern us, Commander. If the Crovox succeed, how long do you think it will be before they turn their sights on the rest of the galaxy? We have a chance to stop them here and now." For a long moment, Alara was silent. Ethan could see the conflict playing out on her face, the warring impulses of caution and courage. Finally, she sighed. "All right, Reeves, you have my permission, but if this goes sideways, it's on your head." Ethan grinned, relief flooding through him. "Understood, Commander. I won't let you down." With Alara's blessing, Ethan threw himself into his work with renewed energy. He cannibalized a station's backup generator, stripping it down to its core components. He worked day and night, fueled by a sense of urgency and purpose he hadn't felt in years. Zara and her crew watched in amazement as he worked, marveling at the speed and skill with which he adapted their technology to his own designs. Ethan, for his part, found himself increasingly drawn to the Zolothians, to their quiet strength and unwavering commitment to their mission. Particularly Zara. The more time he spent with her, the more he found himself admiring her intelligence, her compassion, her fierce determination in the face of overwhelming odds. And sometimes, when their eyes met across a tangle of wires and circuitry, he thought he saw a flicker of something more, a connection that went beyond the simple bond of mechanic and client. But there was no time to dwell on such things. The Krovoks were drawing ever closer, and the clock was ticking. Finally, after 3 grueling days of work, it was done. The EMP cannon sat nestled in the belly of the Zolothian ship, a bulky, inelegant thing cobbled together from mismatched parts. But when Ethan powered it up, the hum of its generators was the sweetest sound he'd ever heard. "It's not pretty," he said, wiping the sweat from his brow, "but it'll get the job done." Zara laid a hand on his shoulder, her touch sending a jolt of electricity through him. "It's perfect," she said softly. "Thank you, Ethan, for everything." Ethan swallowed hard, suddenly finding it difficult to meet her gaze. "Thank me when we get you safe," he said gruffly. "For now, we'd better get moving. The Krovoks will be here any minute." As if on cue, the station's proximity alarms began to blare. The Krovoks had arrived, and the final showdown was about to begin. And Ethan Reeves, the lonely mechanic from the edge of space, found himself at the center of it all, fighting not just for the lives of the Zolothians, but for the fate of the galaxy itself. The chase. The Krovoks' ship was a behemoth, a jagged mass of black metal bristling with weapons. It dwarfed the Zolothian vessel as it bore down on them, its engines roaring like a hungry beast. On the bridge of the Quantum Whisper, Ethan felt a bead of sweat trickle down his spine. He'd faced down his share of challenges in his time, but nothing like this. The fate of an entire galaxy rested on the shoulders of a handful of Zolothian pacifists and one lone human mechanic. But if there was one thing Ethan had learned in his years on the fringes of space, it was that sometimes the greatest strength came from the most unlikely places. "All right," he said, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "Let's do this. Zara, take us out." Zara nodded, her fingers flying over the ship's controls. The Quantum Whisper leaped forward, its engines thrumming with power. For a moment, Ethan dared to hope that they might actually make it. But the Krovoks were not so easily outrun. Their ship matched the Zolothians' pace, closing the distance with terrifying speed. "They're gaining on us," one of the Zolothian crew members cried, panic edging into his voice. Ethan gritted his teeth. "Not for long," he said. "Zara, head for the Elixion belt." Zara's eyes widened. "The asteroid field, but our shields are still weak from the last crossing. We might not make it through a second time." Ethan met her gaze steadily. "We don't need to make it through. We just need to get them to follow us in." Understanding dawned on Zara's face. She gave a short, sharp nod and turned the ship towards the swirling mass of rocks and debris. The Quantum Whisper plunged into the Elixion belt, its shields flickering as asteroids pounded against them. Ethan clung to the console, his knuckles white with strain. The ship shuddered and groaned around him, the hull creaking under the onslaught. But the Zolothian craftsmanship held true. The ship wove through the deadly maze of asteroids, always just one step ahead of the pursuing Krovoks. Ethan watched the sensor readouts, his heart in his throat. The Krovoks' ship was taking a beating, its shields straining under the constant barrage of impacts. But still, it kept coming, relentless in its pursuit. "Come on," Ethan muttered under his breath. "Take the bait." And then, just when he thought the Krovoks might pull back, they committed fully to the chase. Their ship plunged into the densest part of the belt, laser cannons blazing as they tried to blast a path through the asteroids. It was the moment Ethan had been waiting for. "Now," he shouted, "fire the EMP." Zora slammed her hand down on the firing control. The Quantum Whisper shuddered as the makeshift cannon unleashed its payload, a pulsing wave of electromagnetic energy that ripped through the asteroid field. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the Crovox ship faltered, its lights flickering and dying as the EMP washed over it. It drifted, powerless and helpless, as asteroids pounded into its defenseless hull. A cheer went up from the Zolothian crew, but Ethan held up a hand, his eyes fixed on the sensor readouts. "It's not over yet," he said grimly. "Look." On the screen, a second Crovox ship appeared, emerging from the shadow of a massive asteroid. It had been lying in wait, letting its companion draw the Zolothians into the trap. And now, with the Quantum Whisper's EMP expended and its shields battered by the crossing, they were vulnerable. "Evasive maneuvers," Zara cried, wrenching the ship into a desperate spiral. But it was too late. The Crovox ship was already upon them, its weapons charging for a final devastating salvo. Ethan closed his eyes, bracing for the end. But in that moment, as all seemed lost, a thought struck him. A crazy, impossible thought, born of desperation and a mechanic's intuition. "The plasma conduits," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Zara, vent the plasma conduits. All of them. Now." Zara stared at him, her eyes wide with shock. "But that will leave us defenseless. We'll be venting our own lifeblood into space." Ethan met her gaze, a strange calm settling over him. "Trust me," he said softly, "it's our only chance." And with a trembling hand, Zara initiated the vent. The Quantum Whisper shuddered as its glowing lifeblood spewed into the void, a shimmering cloud of plasma that enveloped the ship like a shroud. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the plasma ignited, a searing flash of light that blinded the senses and seared the void. The Crovox ship, caught in the heart of the blast, crumpled like tinfoil, its hull bursting apart under the onslaught. And the Quantum Whisper, riding the shockwave like a surfer on a cosmic wave, burst free of the Elixir belt and into clear space, battered but alive. Ethan sagged back in his seat, his heart pounding in his chest. He'd done it. Against all odds, he'd gotten them through. But even as relief washed over him, he knew that this was only the beginning. The Crovox would not give up so easily, and the secrets that Zara and her crew carried were far from safe. The chase was over, but the real battle was just beginning. Turning the tables, in the aftermath of their harrowing escape, the crew of the Quantum Whisper regrouped and assessed the damage. The ship had taken a beating, but thanks to Ethan's quick thinking and Zolothian engineering, they were still in one piece. But the close call had rattled them all. It was clear that as long as the Crovox were on their tail, they would never reach their destination safely. They needed a plan, and as Ethan pored over the ship's schematics, an idea began to take shape in his mind. It was risky, perhaps even reckless, but it might just be crazy enough to work. "The medical bay," he said, breaking the tense silence on the bridge. "Zara, you said your people have advanced medical technology. How advanced are we talking?" Zara blinked, taken aback by the question. "Our medical scanners are capable of mapping a being's physiology down to the subatomic level. We can diagnose and treat almost any known condition." Ethan held up a hand, his mind racing ahead. "And these scanners, they use some kind of directional beam, right? To focus a scanning field?" Zara nodded slowly. "Yes, but I don't see how." "What if we could modify the scanners?" Ethan pressed on, excitement building in his voice. "Turn them into a weapon. If we could focus that beam, amplify its power." Understanding dawned in Zara's eyes. "We could use it to target the Crovox systems. Overload their shields, fry their circuits." "Exactly." Ethan grinned, the thrill of possibility singing in his veins. But the excitement was short-lived. One of the Zolothian crew, an elder named Talos, stepped forward, his face grave. "Such an action goes against everything we stand for," he said softly. "We are healers, not warriors. To turn our tools of life into instruments of destruction." Ethan felt a pang of guilt. He knew how much the Zolothians' pacifist ideals meant to them. to ask them to compromise those ideals, even in the face of annihilation. But Zara surprised him. She laid a gentle hand on Tavo's arm, her eyes shining with a fierce determination. "I understand your hesitation, old friend," she said softly. "But sometimes, to preserve life, we must be willing to fight for it. The Krovoks will not stop until they have what we carry. And if they succeed, billions will suffer. Is that not a greater violence than any we might inflict in self-defense?" Talos was silent for a long moment. Then slowly he bowed his head. "You speak wisely, Commander. Though it pains me, I will support this course of action." With the decision made, Ethan and the Zolothians set to work. They labored tirelessly, modifying the medical scanners, boosting their power, focusing their beams into tight, searing lances of energy. It was delicate work, fraught with risk. One miscalculation, one overloaded circuit, and they could all be vaporized in an instant. But Ethan had never felt more alive. Working side by side with Zara, watching her brilliant mind tackle problems that would have stumped the finest human engineers, he felt a sense of connection he'd never known before. And when the work was done, when the modified scanners hummed with barely contained power, he knew they had created something extraordinary. Something that might just turn the tide of this war. The Krovoks caught up to them in the shadow of a dying star. Their ship loomed out of the darkness, a nightmare of jagged metal and pulsing weapons. But this time, a quantum whisper was ready. As the Krovoks opened fire, Zora activated the modified scanners. Beams of blinding light lanced out, slicing through the void with pinpoint precision. The effect was devastating. The Krovoks ship shuddered under the assault, its shields flickering and failing. Its weapons sputtered and died, its engines coughing and going dark. And as the quantum whisper sailed past the drifting hulk, Ethan couldn't help but let out a whoop of triumph. They had done it. Against all odds, they had turned the tables on their pursuers. But even as they celebrated, Ethan knew that their journey was far from over. The Krovoks were not the only threat out there, and the secrets the Zolothians carried were too valuable to go uncontested for long. They had won a battle, but the war for the fate of the galaxy was just beginning. And Ethan Reeves, the mechanic from the edge of nowhere, found himself at the very heart of it all, fighting alongside the most extraordinary beings he had ever known, for a cause greater than he had ever imagined. It was a challenge he had never sought, a destiny he had never asked for. But as he looked into Zara's shining eyes, felt the thrum of the ship beneath his feet, and the fire of purpose in his heart, he knew there was nowhere else in the universe he would rather be. Aftermath and revelations. The quantum whisper limped into the Zolothian homeworld's orbit, its hull scarred and battered, but its spirit unbroken. They had made it, against all odds. The cure was safe. As they descended through the atmosphere, Ethan couldn't help but stare in wonder at the world below. Towering cities of shimmering crystal rose from lush, verdant landscapes, their spires reaching towards the heavens. It was a world of beauty and harmony, untouched by the ravages of war. But as they drew closer, the scars of the plague became evident. Whole city blocks lay abandoned, their crystal spires dark and lifeless. In the streets below, Ethan could see the flicker of containment fields, quarantining the infected from the healthy. It was a sobering sight, a reminder of the stakes they had fought for. When they landed, they were greeted by a delegation of Zolothian leaders, their faces lined with worry and hope. They ushered Zara and her crew into a grand chamber, a hall of soaring arches and shimmering light. And there, on a pedestal of glowing crystal, lay the cure. It was a small thing, a vial of shimmering liquid no larger than Ethan's thumb, but it held the power to save countless lives, to turn the tide of a war that had consumed the galaxy. As the Zolothian scientists set to work, synthesizing and distributing the cure, Ethan found himself pulled aside by the High Counselor, a being of such wisdom and grace that Ethan felt humbled in their presence. "Ethan Reeves," the High Counselor said, their voice a melodic whisper. "We owe you a debt that can never be repaid. You saved not just our people, but the people of every world threatened by this plague. Ethan shuffled his feet, suddenly self-conscious. I was just doing my job, he mumbled. Zara and her crew did the real work. I'm just a mechanic. The High Counselor smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. A mechanic, you say? I think not. A mechanic fixes broken things. But you, Ethan Rees, have a gift for seeing the potential in things. In people. You saw the potential in a broken ship, in a crew of pacifists facing impossible odds. You saw the potential in yourself. Ethan blinked, taken aback by the High Counselor's words. He had never thought of himself that way. He had always been just Ethan, the guy who fixed things, the guy who kept his head down and tried to stay out of trouble. But as he looked back on the events of the past few days, he realized that the High Counselor was right. He had seen potential. In the Quantum Whisper, in Zara and her crew, in the crazy, desperate plan that had saved them all. And in doing so, perhaps he had found a potential in himself that he had never known existed. As the High Counselor moved away, Ethan found himself wandering the halls of the Zolothian citadel, lost in thought. And then, turning a corner, he found himself face to face with Zara. For a moment, they just stood there, staring at each other. And then, without a word, they were in each other's arms, holding each other tight. We did it, Zara whispered, her voice choked with emotion. We actually did it. Ethan smiled, burying his face in her shimmering hair. Yeah, he said softly, we did. They stood like that for a long time, just holding each other, savoring the moment of peace and triumph. But as they finally pulled apart, Ethan saw a flicker of something in Zara's eyes. Something that looked almost like regret. Zara, he asked, suddenly concerned. What's wrong? Zara sighed, a deep, weary sound. Ethan, she said softly, there's something I have to tell you, about the plague, about everything. And as she began to speak, Ethan felt a chill run down his spine, because the story she told was not one of a simple plague or a simple war. It was a story of secrets and lies, of ancient evils and hidden agendas. A story that would change everything he thought he knew about the galaxy and his place in it. And as he listened, Ethan realized that their journey was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. Because the real threat, the true enemy, was still out there. And it was up to them, a ragtag band of misfits and dreamers, to stop it. No matter the cost. Galactic Peacemaker. In the days that followed, Ethan found himself thrust into a role he had never imagined for himself. The story of his actions aboard the Quantum Whisper had spread like wildfire, and now, everywhere he went, he was greeted with awe and respect. The Zolothians hailed him as a hero, a savior who had risked everything to protect their most precious cargo. And as word of his deeds spread beyond Xyloth, other races began to take notice. Delegations from worlds across the galaxy arrived daily, each seeking an audience with the legendary human mechanic who had outsmarted the Crovox. They came with gifts and honors, with pleas for aid and offers of alliance. At first, Ethan was overwhelmed by the attention. He had never sought fame or glory, and the weight of so many expectations felt like a burden he was ill-equipped to bear. But Zara was there beside him, her quiet strength and wisdom guiding him through the storm. And as he watched her navigate the delicate dance of diplomacy, he began to see the role he could play. For Ethan had a unique perspective, a way of seeing the galaxy that was different from any other. As a mechanic, he had learned to look past the surface of things, to see the intricate workings beneath. And as he listened to the delegates and diplomats, he began to see the galaxy in the same way. He saw the way old grudges and ancient rivalries were gumming up the works, preventing the races of the galaxy from working together. He saw the way fear and mistrust were causing civilizations to withdraw into themselves, hoarding resources and knowledge that could benefit all. And he saw the way a simple act of kindness, a willingness to listen and understand, could start to break down those barriers. So Ethan became a different kind of mechanic. He traveled from world to world, not to fix ships or machines, but to mend the broken relationships between peoples. He listened to the concerns of the Krag, a warrior race who had long been shunned by their neighbors for their violent past, and he helped them find a new path, one that honored their strength while channeling it towards protection and service. He mediated a dispute between the Alosi and the Van, two races who had been locked in a bitter trade war for generations, and he showed them how they could both prosper by working together, each providing what the other lacked. He even ventured into the heart of Krovok's space, risking his life to meet with their leaders and understand their fears and desires. And though he could not undo centuries of aggression and conquest, he planted the seeds of change, showing them a glimpse of a different way. Through it all, Zara was his constant companion and closest advisor. Her wisdom and compassion tempered his brashness, while his ingenuity and determination spurred her to new heights of diplomacy. Together, they were a force to be reckoned with, a symbol of what the galaxy could achieve if it only worked in harmony. And slowly but surely, the tide began to turn. Alliances were forged, old wounds were healed, and a new era of cooperation and exchange began to dawn. Ethan had never sought to be a leader, never imagined himself as a galactic peacemaker. But he had found his calling, his true purpose. And as he stood on the bridge of the Quantum Whisper, gazing out at the stars that he had once only dreamed of, he knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be. But even as he savored this moment of triumph, Ethan knew that the greatest challenge was yet to come. For the secret that Zara had shared with him, the truth about the plague and the ancient evil behind it, still loomed over them all. An evil that would stop at nothing to plunge the galaxy back into darkness and chaos. And it would take every ounce of Ethan's skill, every bit of the trust and cooperation he had fostered, to face that threat head-on. But he was ready to fight, ready to lead, ready to do whatever it took. For he was Ethan Reeves, the mechanic who had become a legend, and his greatest repair job was just beginning. The great threat. The summons came in the dead of night. A cryptic message beamed directly to the Quantum Whisper's comm system. Ethan was jolted awake by the urgent tone, his heart pounding as he raced to the bridge. Zara was already there, her face drawn and pale in the dim light. On the view screen, a haggard figure stared out at them, its features obscured by static. Ethan Reeves, the figure said, its voice a rasping whisper. "You are needed." And then the image shifted, revealing a sight that made Ethan's blood run cold. It was a planet, or what was left of one. Its surface was a roiling mass of darkness, a seething ocean of shadow that seemed to devour all light, and at its center, a pulsing, malevolent core of pure, unnaturalized evil. "What is that?" Ethan breathed, unable to tear his eyes away from the horrifying sight. "The void," the figure replied, its voice heavy with dread. "An ancient evil, older than the stars themselves. It consumes all in its path, growing ever stronger with each world it devours." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. He had heard whispers of the void, ancient legends that spoke of a darkness beyond all reckoning. But he had always dismissed them as mere myths, stories to frighten children. Now he knew better. "What can we do?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. The figure shook its head. "Alone, nothing. The void is too powerful, too vast. But together, with the combined might of the galaxy's greatest civilizations." Ethan nodded, understanding dawning. A united front. Every race, every world, standing as one against the darkness. The figure inclined its head. "It will not be easy. The void has agents everywhere, sowing discord and chaos. And there are those who would seek to use this crisis for their own gain." Ethan's mind raced, thinking of the Krovoks, of the other races who had yet to let go of their old feuds and rivalries. "I'll do it," he said, his voice firm with resolve. "I'll bring them together, whatever it takes." The figure seemed to smile, a brief flicker of hope in its haunted eyes. "Then there may yet be a chance. But hurry, Ethan Reeves. The void grows stronger with each passing moment." And with that, the transmission cut out, leaving Ethan and Zara alone in the sudden silence. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of what they had just heard, of the task that lay before them, was almost too much to bear. But then Zara reached out, her hand finding Ethan's in the darkness. "Together," she said softly, her voice a promise and a prayer. Ethan nodded, squeezing her hand tight. "Together," he echoed. And with that, they set to work. The next days were a blur of activity as Ethan and Zara raced from world to world, rallying support for the coming battle. They met with leaders and diplomats, with warriors and scientists, urging them to put aside their differences and stand united against the coming storm. It was not an easy task. Old grudges died hard, and many were hesitant to commit their resources to a fight they feared could not be won. But Ethan was relentless, his passion and determination winning over even the most stubborn of holdouts. And slowly but surely, a coalition began to form. Warships from a dozen worlds gathered at the appointed rendezvous, their crews grim-faced and determined. Scientists and engineers pooled their knowledge, working frantically to devise weapons and defenses that could stand against the void's might. And at the center of it all, Ethan and Zara, the unlikely duo who had started it all, who had brought hope to a galaxy on the brink of despair. As the fleet set out, charting a course for the heart of the void, Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at what they had accomplished. Races that had been enemies for millennia now flew side by side, united by a common cause. It was a sight he had never thought to see, a testament to the power of cooperation and trust. But even as he savored this moment of unity, Ethan knew that the true test was yet to come. For the void awaited them, a hungering darkness that would stop at nothing to consume all light and life. And it would take every ounce of their combined strength, every shred of their courage and determination, to face that darkness head-on and emerge victorious. But they would face it, together, for the fate of the galaxy itself hung in the balance. And Ethan Reeves, the mechanic turned peacemaker turned leader, would be there at the forefront, ready to do whatever it took to see this through to the end. And he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever trials and tribulations the future might bring, he would face them with the same courage, the same compassion, the same unwavering determination that had brought him this far. For he was Ethan Reeves, the man who had looked into the heart of the void and found the power of understanding. And there was nothing in the universe that could stop him now.